light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. One of the tense areas in our society now, and perhaps in every age, is relationships with people who are employed in law enforcement. I have with me a guest today who is interested in discussing these subjects with me so that we can hopefully bring more insight to these sorts of difficult, challenging interactions. To me, there needs to be accountability in order for trust to be legitimate. If there is no accountability, then there's no reason to trust. And especially within law enforcement, the personnel need to be trustworthy. But of course, in some situations, they're caught between a system that doesn't really work, a job they're supposed to do, but maybe they can't do it as well as they should. And then on the other side of that, of course, are the citizens of the general public who need to know how to navigate this system. So I'm very thankful to have a guest, but we've allowed that guest to be off camera and to remain anonymous and be unidentified so that we can talk about the issues and the dynamics and the challenges without running a risk of there being negative repercussions. There's always this debate in these sorts of discussions when I have them with my friends about what about all the good officers? Well, in order to be a good officer, the good officer needs to be willing to hold the bad officer accountable. Remaining silent while your colleague is doing something that you know is wrong does not make you a good officer. All that being said, thankfully there are some good officers yet, and I think they should be commended and rewarded and noticed. But a lot of it comes back to both them and us knowing what constitutes good behavior and what is acceptable and what is enabling problems that need to be eradicated. Because the more we live with problems, the more we create a world of oppression and suffering that doesn't need to be there. So, welcome to my guest. And you had mentioned that, was it that there was some history you wanted to share about this whole problem to begin with?
I would. I'd like to share the history of how our small town police stations...
And the one thing I wanted to interject here is the specific example that we're choosing to focus on today is the Trinidad, Colorado Police Department.
Yes.
But the things we're discussing are things that can occur and probably do occur within small town police departments all across the country.
This is true. And so many of these police departments are following this model that we have here in Trinidad. It's called professionalizing the police department.
Professionalizing the police department.
Professionalizing the police department.
Okay.
This started back in the mid-'70s.
Okay, 1970s.
What you try and do in professionalizing your police department is to bring your crime stats down. There are many ways of doing that.
So the idea is if the statistics are lower, it suggests that the police department is doing their job.
Exactly, and your town is becoming safer by the moment.
And of course, everybody wants their towns to be safe.
Sure, and we want everybody to think that our town is safe. So,
well, I would hesitate on that myself. I don't want people to think my town is safe unless it really is safe. For me, what matters is truth. And ideally, truth should be what law enforcement is all about.
unfortunately, here it's also about the mighty dollar and tourism.
Okay.
Yes.
When money becomes the measure, a lot of things go astray.
So, in skewing your crime stats, let's say that you've got car burglaries. There are a lot of car burglaries in your town. Well, we're not going to call them car burglaries anymore. We're going to call them car thefts. So burglaries are way down in Trinidad. Wow, what a safe place it's getting to be.
Just by changing the name, you change the perception.
Change the name.
But you're not telling the truth.
No, you're not. But things look better.
Somebody else pointed out to me once that there actually is no legal requirement upon law enforcement to tell the truth. They, right, for better or for worse, they are free to tell any lie they want in the performance of their duties.
However, if an officer gets caught perjuring himself or herself,
But that's after it's in
every
court.
every single case that officer has worked on is now in question.
Okay,
So they dare not get caught either on the stand or off the stand. They dare not get caught lying.
but when they stop you along the road, they will tell you anything, or they could tell you anything, and you can't assume that what they're telling you is true.
You cannot, and that is not the time to confront an officer. The time to confront an officer is in the courtroom.
Yeah, it's not that you call them a liar on the spot, but you have to respond as if what they're saying sounds questionable, it may very well be. And it doesn't mean you call them a liar on the spot, but it does mean that you temper your answer so as not to incriminate yourself in ways that may not even be true.
When in doubt, keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, I mean, we always,
Yeah.
in every situation, we always have the constitutional right to
Remain silent.
silent. You know, and you can simply, if the officer asks a question you think is inappropriate, you can at that point, if you choose, say, I am now choosing to invoke my right to remain silent until I have legal representation to advocate for me.
One basic misconception about arrest in the United States is that Miranda rights are only read to you if you are going to be questioned, not if you're going to be arrested.
Repeat that one more time, I didn't quite
The
catch.
Miranda rights are only necessary when an officer is going to question you. If he's simply going to arrest you and put you in the back of the car, no Miranda rights.
He doesn't have to read that list of rights.
Only if he's going to question you.
And they're called Miranda rights?
Miranda rights, after the gentleman that, Mr. Miranda, don't remember his first name,
Okay.
that the court case was after. Another thing we are fighting, especially an especially strong, self-serving, good old boy network in
Okay.
this town that is deeply
Which
entrenched.
essentially is cronyism run amok.
And nepotism, yes.
And nepotism also.
Yes.
Which, for anyone who's unfamiliar with the word nepotism,
Well, using your using your relatives, giving your relatives jobs.
okay. So it's specifically involving actual relations, not just a question of who owes who a favor, but actually making
Much
it
as
a
we are-
family business.
Much as we are seeing in the White House right now.
Okay. Because when you give positions to, well, it turns what's supposed to be a representative governmental system into a family business, basically.
Mm-hmm. And we have some of that here in Trinidad. The citizens of Trinidad deserve better than that. They deserve a town that is actually better in reality and not just looking better on paper.
It seems to me if there's a discrepancy between what is and what is said, we're dealing with the basic problem of lying, but it's often not done in such a blatant fashion that you can say, this is the lie, or that is the lie, or where is the lie, but it's creating a completely dishonest representation that can't bring anything good to a community.
Here are some ways that a police department can lower their crime stats. The dispatchers can be told to kiss off calls any way possible.
To do what, call?
To kiss off calls. Tell the person that's calling, oh, that's in another jurisdiction, you need to call the sheriff's office.
Okay, various ways
any-
of being dismissive.
Various ways of being dismissive.
Okay,
Or convince them no crime took place.
okay. It really wasn't as bad as you think it is. You're still alive, aren't you? So quit
Okay,
complaining.
here's a
all that sort of
specific,
stuff.
I have a specific example of lady called, someone had breached a window in her home
Okay.
and taken her laptop.
Okay.
She called the police. The police said, we think your son did it. We're not going to take a report.
Oh my.
A few days later, she got cleaned out.
Oh,
Those
you mean 2 days later they came back and stole the rest of,
the burglars came back and stole the rest of it.
but there was no report of the first time, and so they
Nope.
could treat it as if it was a first offense.
Yes.
But they never did catch him anyway?
I do not have the end of that.
That's kind of beside the point,
Yeah.
but to me it seems like whenever you're dealing with legal matters, it's very important to have a paper trail. You know, a record of when the first complaint was, when the second complaint was, what
And-
actions were taken, all that sort of
And
stuff.
they are denying that.
Everything has to be documented. It has to be in writing.
And if it's not in writing, it didn't take place.
If it's not in writing, it didn't take place. Boy, wish we could apply that to a whole lot of different events in our history.
Really.
If just by simply not writing about it, it never happened. Well, then why do we still have people who have emotional and psychological and even physical wounds from this incident that never happened?
I personally was a victim of a felony. When the police showed up, I
Which,
called them.
just to be clear, felonies are
Punishable by a
Um,
year or more in prison.
I'm trying to remember which, there's
A
felonies and there's
misdemeanor.
misdemeanors.
A misdemeanor is a year or less in jail. Jail
So
and prison.
a misdemeanor is less than a felony.
Yes.
By the time you get to felony, you're 2 steps up into the legal system.
You're pretty far in there. Yep.
Okay.
Anyway, I was a victim of a felony. The police showed up, shook their finger at the perpetrator's face and said, "That's a felony, you mustn't do that," and they left.
Oh my.
Now, at this point, I was thinking, okay, I can't get any protection from the police. I ended up leaving the home, and I was homeless for a couple of months.
So this was your own experience,
This was my own experience.
which to me is outrageous, that someone in desperate circumstances would have nowhere to turn and no one to protect them. Where did the slogan "to serve and protect" ever get started? Because it doesn't
Well,
seem to be happening very well.
And what they need to do is to take the quotes off. To
Okay.
serve and protect. Kind of sounds like,
So when they put it in quotation marks, it means they're quoting somebody who said it. It doesn't necessarily mean they're committed to doing it.
this is true. I was also recently told when I attempted to report a felony that as a Christian I should forgive and forget. Now,
Well, but
It was a
theology and
sin.
religion,
What-
or theology and law, need to be separate. You know, what
Re-
you believe at church and what happens in legally in a society are not the same thing. We don't live in a theocracy.
we do not. And what was committed was a sin, but it was also a felony.
But those are 2 totally separate systems.
They are 2 totally different systems and separate systems, and it was quite insulting to me to be told that.
Well, to me, the first, well, it's probably not legally a crime, but the first problem of being a victim of any crime is convincing everyone else that it actually happened.
Yes.
And to the extent that anyone can tell you you didn't experience what you really experienced, it leaves that person with a psychological and emotional struggle within themselves, because on one hand they're trying to heal from this visible or invisible wound, but if they can't even be validated in the fact that you were hurt, this was wrong, what happened to you was terrible, they've got twice the battle, because the first thing you have to convince yourself and everyone else of is that there's something to be addressed.
Yes.
And then after you convince everyone else, you still have the work of addressing whatever psychological or physical or emotional wound occurred.
This is true. What we need to do to help our police out here is, number one, decentralize them.
Decentralize.
In other words, we need small substations. Let's
Instead
say
of one main police
instead of one
department
main
that
police.
facilitates 40
Right.
officers,
Right.
you'd have a number of substations.
That would each
each have
handle
maybe 10.
10, 5, whatever.
Okay.
They would be scattered throughout the city. They would walk their beats.
Well, and if they walked their beat, they would know the people in the neighborhood. They would know who was trustworthy and who was not to some extent. They would know who was going through a divorce, who was doing well, who was,
Exactly.
where the elderly person lived, which house had children.
It's more proactive than reactive.
It's proactive. It's not reactive. But it gives them, I would think, valuable information to do their job 100 times more effectively.
We could also hire more females and minorities.
So there's not adequate representation of
Not-
women and minorities in law enforcement.
No.
Okay.
Um,
Do you have any idea what the balance is at the present time?
I do not know here what it is.
Okay.
Um,
Would it be reasonable to say there should be gender parity, that it should be 50-50 men and women?
that's up
I
for
mean, I'm
debate.
sure that's ideal, but
That's up for debate.
it's up for debate.
Yes.
Okay.
So, if you can pass the physical, if you can pass the psychological, if you want to be a police officer, you should be able to be a police officer.
So,
No matter your gender.
so really, gender and race should not enter into it at all. It should be just a simple matter of test results.
Exactly.
So if anyone is concerned about the actual representation in a police department, the things they would need to look at is the test fair and equally applied? And are there applicants from, are there
Representative.
applicants from all the genders and all the races and all the people groups involved? If a particular group is simply not ever applying for police positions or ever getting involved in law enforcement, I would be curious to know why.
It's not that easy to pass the psychological to be an officer.
Okay.
Lots of men and women flunk that part of it.
But there are ways of confirming that the psychological test is a fair test?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes. By having professionals first make the test and then test the test. If we rotated our officers, we could reduce their vulnerability to corruption.
Okay.
If you
When you
stayed
say
on
rotate them, you mean between substations, or you
between
mean
beats, between substations, yes.
between substations?
Yes.
Okay.
Um,
So they, over time, they would get to know most of their town, not just a particular neighborhood.
exactly.
Okay.
And they wouldn't be working with the same people for 20 years.
Because
would
if
be
you're working
different
with the
areas.
same person for 20 years, it
You're
makes
more
it more
vulnerable.
difficult to report them if they
Yes.
behave inappropriately.
And possibly easier to bribe them.
Easier to bribe.
To bribe them. I am not saying that anybody in this town is being bribed. I have no
No, and
evidence
I'm not,
of that,
not
but I'm
making
just
that
saying it.
accusation either. I'm trying to understand why working with someone a long time would make it easier to actually bribe them.
If you don't know them for very long, it might be tougher to bribe them because you don't know how to approach them or
So it is actually a danger that colleagues would actually get into bribing their colleagues. Not just you owe me a favor, whatever, but I will actually give you money or grant you a favor or something if you do this for me.
very common in some areas of the United States.
Okay? So the bribes actually become like a bonus on your paycheck.
Exactly.
Oh dear.
Yes.
Yeah, somewhere in the midst of all this, I'm concerned about the profession retaining a sense of honor. But in order to be honorable, it seems to me you need to be honest and fair and do your job and verifiably, truly, genuinely accomplish lower crime occurrence within whatever neighborhood you're assigned to.
That would be ideal.
It seems like not as many people are reaching for that anymore, and I'm not sure why.
I'd also like to see a strict merit system for promotion within the department.
What kind of merit system?
A very strict merit system.
A strict merit
Yes.
system. Okay. The other thing I've mentioned to a couple people, and I'll try to be brief here rather than digress too much, but considering the volume and the intensity of violence to which law enforcement is exposed, I would love to see it actually mandated, not just suggested or available, but mandated, that if you witness a murder, you are assigned 5 to 10 hours, whatever seems appropriate, of psychological counseling to process the emotional turmoil of witnessing a murder. I mean, these are horrendous things that people shouldn't be expected to deal with all on their own.
But they are.
But they are, as you say.
And speaking out on issues of the day it's our duty.
It's our duty.
It is our duty, each one of us, to speak out.
It's the duty of law enforcement to speak out about.
It's a duty of citizens to
The
speak
duty
out.
of citizens to speak out about what's happening, about their experiences with law enforcement.
Exactly.
Because the only thing, if they remain silent, it enables all sorts of dysfunctional practices and oppression to continue.
Exactly.
I mean, in a sense, we're basically looking at that path and saying, you know, this is the road to hell. Do you really want to walk it? And if you remain silent, you are putting a brick in the road to hell. If you remain silent when you need to speak out. And I would like to think that there's, well, one of the sayings I grew up with was the notion that who over your head can I talk to next? And the idea that there is accountability in the system, that the officer is responsible to a sergeant or commanding officer, police chief, and there's someone over that person. In the case of Trinidad, it would be the town manager, and then over the town manager is the town council, and over the town council, I guess you have the citizens that elect them, but there are also federal authorities that would step in if there was actual criminal activity.
If there was federal criminal activity.
Okay, so it depends on whether it's breaking a federal law or whether it's breaking a state law. If it's breaking a state law, then you run into this challenge of, is there a state law that addresses this, and is the state district attorney willing to address it?
Exactly.
And I notice our clock is totally run out, but I'm not sure how long ago. So I don't know how far over we are. Do you want to continue talking and leave me to edit it, or break it up into two, or how do you want to proceed?
Oh, you mean move on to the next subject?
How much more about police did you want to say?
That was it.
That was, you have nothing else that you needed to add? Okay. Well, I guess to summarize this, I'm not sure how many minutes we're over, but hopefully I can edit out pauses or stumbling or something in order to bring it to the required length. But to summarize this complex issue, I guess, the police are human, but they're part of a system that is not. And the question at any moment is whether they're behaving more like the humans they are, or more like the system that is not human and that doesn't have the compassion that only humans can provide. In order to make a world worth living in, it's going to take all of us working together. I really believe that. And maybe it's improbable, but it's still possible. It's just a question of waiting for us all to wake up and support the good officers in being good officers, and hold the officers accountable who are not being good officers, and hold the officers accountable who are not holding their colleagues accountable. because everything is so interconnected. But
And I'd like to make it. I'd
what would
like
you
to
like
make
to
it
add in
very
summary
clear.
also?
I'd like to make it very clear that I am on the officer's side in this. That's the side of the fence that I sit on. However, every bad officer gives every good officer a black eye.
exactly. Well, and bring shame to the profession.
Exactly. And there's
I-
nothing we hate worse.
I like to think I'm on neither side, but to me, I guess it's not either or, it's a both and. You need to have citizens and officers and everybody working together is a both, it's both of us, the citizens and the good officers, in order to form a healthy community and a world that is worth living in. And a place in which we can all feel safe regardless of our identity, and in which the officers can feel supported in doing their jobs in the best possible way, and in the way that brings the most honor to themselves and to their profession.
Well said.
Thank you very much for being willing to have this discussion with me today.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching.